Giovanni's breathing changed at 3:42 in the morning. I knew before the monitor started beeping, before the numbers on the screen shifted into dangerous territory. 6 months of caring for him had taught me to read the subtle signs, the small catches in his chest, the way his fingers would curl slightly when pain crept past the morphine barrier. I set down my book and moved to his bedside, pressing 2 fingers gently against his wrist. His pulse fluttered beneath my touch, irregular and weakening. November rain tapped steadily against the windows of the Connecticut mansion, a backdrop I'd grown accustomed to during the long night shifts. "Mr. Santoro," I said softly, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids lifted halfway, those dark eyes that once must have commanded rooms now clouded with medication and exhaustion. He managed a small nod. "I'm going to call your family now. Is that all right?" Another nod. His hand moved slightly on the blanket, and I understood the gesture. I took his weathered hand in both of mine, feeling the papery texture of his skin, the coolness that had been spreading from his extremities for the past week. "They'll be here soon," I promised. The number for his son was programmed into the bedside phone under a simple entry marked N. I'd never met Nicholas Santoro in person, though I'd spoken to him twice in 6 months, both conversations brief and formal. He always asked the same questions: pain levels, medication adjustments, my assessment of his father's remaining time. His voice carried an accent I couldn't quite place, something Mediterranean smoothed by years in America. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "Yes, Mr. Santoro, this is Olivia Grant. You should come now. Your father's condition has deteriorated significantly in the last hour." Silence stretched for 3 seconds. I heard movement in the background, fabric rustling, a door closing. 20 minutes, he said, and the line went dead. I adjusted Giovanni's pillows, checked his IV flow, and increased the oxygen just slightly. The agency that hired me had been explicit in their instructions: keep him comfortable, maintain his dignity, and never ask questions about the armed men who patrolled the grounds or the visitors who came at odd hours speaking in rapid Italian. The pay was exceptional. 3 times what I'd made at any hospital. Enough to finally start chipping away at the medical debt that had crushed me since my grandmother died. The isolation didn't bother me. I'd grown used to being alone. Giovanni's eyes found mine again. He lifted one finger, beckoning me closer. When I leaned down, he whispered something in Italian, his voice barely audible over the oxygen hiss. I didn't speak Italian fluently, but my grandmother had taught me enough Sicilian dialect to recognize what he was saying. He was thanking me. Not for the medical care, but for treating him like a person instead of a patient, for reading to him in the afternoons, for not flinching when men with shoulder holsters stood outside his door. "You're welcome," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "You made these months easier than you know." Headlights swept across the window at 4:03. I heard car doors slam, multiple sets of footsteps on the gravel drive, then the front door opening 2 floors below. The security guard stationed in the hallway spoke quietly to someone, his deferential tone different from his usual casual demeanor. The footsteps on the stairs were purposeful, controlled. I straightened my scrubs and stepped back from the bed, giving the family space. The door opened. Nicholas Santoro filled the doorway in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. Though he was tall, easily over 6 feet, he wore a charcoal suit despite the hour, the jacket unbuttoned, his white shirt open at the collar. Dark hair swept back from a face built from strong angles and hard lines. His eyes, the same deep brown as his father's but sharper, clearer, scanned the room in one swift assessment before landing on the figure in the bed. 3 men entered behind him, all wearing dark suits and carrying themselves with the same controlled awareness. One of them I recognized from previous visits. Roberto, the one with graying hair who always nodded politely when our paths crossed. Nicholas moved to his father's side with swift strides. He said something in Italian, low and urgent. Giovanni's eyes opened, focusing on his son with effort. I retreated to the corner near the medical equipment, giving them privacy but staying close in case I was needed. Father and son spoke quietly in their native language, words I couldn't fully understand, but whose emotional weight needed no translation. Roberto positioned himself near the door while the other 2 men remained in the hallway. His gaze flickered to me briefly, a question in his expression, but I kept my attention on Giovanni's vitals. The conversation between Nicholas and his father lasted 4 minutes. Giovanni's responses grew weaker, his breathing more labored. Nicholas gripped his father's hand, and I saw the muscles in his jaw working, the only visible sign of emotion on his otherwise controlled features. At 4:31, Giovanni's oxygen saturation dropped sharply. I moved forward without thinking, checking the monitor, adjusting the flow. Nicholas stepped back, watching me work with an intensity that made my hands want to shake. His lungs are filling with fluid, I explained quietly, meeting Nicholas's stare. I can increase the morphine to keep him comfortable, but beyond that, do it, Nicholas said. His voice was rough, carrying an edge of something I recognized from my years in hospice care. Not quite grief yet, but the anticipation of it, the bracing for impact. I administered the medication, then checked Giovanni's pulse again. Weaker still, the beats spacing further apart. Nicholas returned to his father's side, leaning close, speaking words I couldn't hear. Roberto shifted his weight, his weathered face drawn with genuine sorrow. Giovanni Santoro took his last breath at 4:37 in the morning. The monitors flatlined with a steady tone that cut through the rain sounds. I moved immediately to silence the alarms, then stepped forward to check for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. "He's gone," I said softly, though they already knew. Nicholas remained perfectly still, his hand still holding his father's, his eyes fixed on the older man's face. The silence stretched, broken only by the rain and the quiet sounds of Roberto crossing himself. I'd been present for many deaths in my career. I'd learned to recognize the different ways people processed loss. Nicholas Santoro's grief was locked behind walls of iron control, visible only in the slight tremor of his hand before he steadied it, the single slow breath he took before releasing his father's fingers. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and became someone else entirely. The transformation took seconds. The sun disappeared, replaced by whoever Nicholas Santoro was to the men who worked for him, to the world outside this room. But I'd seen the crack in the armor. I'd witnessed the moment before the walls went back up. I moved through the familiar routine of post-mortem care, closing Giovanni's eyes, arranging his hands, straightening the blankets. As I leaned over him, words rose unbidden from deep in my memory. A prayer my grandmother had taught me in the Sicilian dialect she'd brought from her village near Palermo. The prayer for the dead, ancient and specific, asking for eternal light and rest for the departed soul. I whispered the words without thinking, my voice low, the cadence automatic after years of hearing my grandmother speak it over relatives, neighbors, anyone from the old country who passed. When I finished and looked up, Nicholas was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Not quite shock, but something close. Recognition, maybe, or confusion. "Where did you learn that?" His voice cut across the space between us, sharp enough to make me flinch. Learn what? That prayer. Those exact words. That dialect. I glanced at Roberto, who watched our exchange with quiet interest, then back to Nicholas. My grandmother taught me. She was from Sicily, a small village near Palermo. She raised me after my parents died. Nicholas's eyes narrowed fractionally. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Roberto stepped forward, his tone gentle. "Miss Grant has been here all night. She should rest. I can drive her home, make sure she gets there safely." It was a reasonable offer, a kind gesture from a man who'd always been courteous during his visits. But before I could respond, before I could even process the suggestion, Nicholas spoke. "No." The single word carried absolute finality. "She leaves with me." Roberto's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing, stepping back immediately. I blinked, exhaustion making it hard to think clearly. "That's not necessary, Mr. Santoro. I can call a car service, or Roberto's offer is—" "You're coming with me," Nicholas interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. He was already moving toward the door, clearly expecting me to follow. I looked at Giovanni one last time, at the peaceful expression that death had brought to his features, then gathered my bag and jacket. My body ached from hours of standing, from the emotional weight of watching someone I'd grown to care for slip away. I didn't have the energy to argue with a grieving son, especially one who radiated the kind of controlled danger that Nicholas Santoro did. Roberto gave me a small nod as I passed, something almost apologetic in his expression, though I didn't understand why. The house was silent as we descended the stairs, the usual nighttime staff apparently keeping their distance. Outside, the rain had intensified, hammering against the gravel drive. A black SUV idled near the entrance, headlights cutting through the downpour. Nicholas held the rear door open, waiting. I slid into the leather seat, setting my bag at my feet. He closed the door with controlled precision, then rounded the vehicle and slid into the driver's seat himself. The engine purred to life. We pulled away from the mansion, leaving the warmth and light behind, heading into the darkness and rain. Nicholas drove in complete silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his profile illuminated periodically by passing streetlights. I watched the raindrops race down the window, my mind numb, my chest tight with a grief that surprised me with its intensity. Giovanni hadn't been family, had barely been a friend in the professional sense, but he'd been kind. He'd shared stories about his childhood in Italy, had asked about my day, had treated me with a respect I'd rarely experienced in my medical career. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it away quickly, turning my face further toward the window. But not before I caught Nicholas's eyes in the rearview mirror, watching me with that same unsettling intensity he'd shown since I'd spoken that prayer. The highway stretched ahead of us, slick with rain and nearly empty at this hour. I expected Nicholas to head south toward the city, toward my small apartment in Queens where I'd been living for the past year. Instead, he took the exit toward Manhattan, navigating through streets I recognized from occasional visits but had never truly explored. Where are we going? My voice sounded hollow in the quiet car, competing with the rhythm of windshield wipers. Somewhere we can talk. Not an answer, but clearly the only one I'd receive. I leaned my head against the cool window, watching the city wake up in slow increments. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early morning workers trudged toward subway entrances. The sky was shifting from black to gray, though true sunrise was still an hour away. We pulled up to a restaurant in Little Italy, its facade dark, a closed sign hanging in the window. The name above the door read Lucia's in elegant script. Nicholas parked directly in front, ignoring the no parking signs, and killed the engine. Come inside. He was out of the car before I could protest, standing in the rain without seeming to notice it. I grabbed my jacket and followed, my sneakers splashing through puddles as I hurried toward the awning where he held open a heavy wooden door. The restaurant interior was beautiful even in darkness. White tablecloths covered small tables arranged with careful spacing. Wine bottles lined shelves along exposed brick walls. The scent of garlic and herbs lingered in the air from the previous night's service. Nicholas flipped a switch, bringing up soft lighting that cast warm shadows across the space. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, draping it over a chair, then rolled up his sleeves with efficient movements. Without a word, he disappeared through a door I assumed led to the kitchen. I stood near the entrance, dripping onto the hardwood floor, unsure what to do. This wasn't a conversation we needed to have. I'd cared for his father. His father had died. My job was finished. We owed each other nothing beyond professional courtesy, but something about the prayer had shaken him. I'd seen it in his face, the shock followed by sharp calculation. Nicholas emerged carrying a small tray. An espresso machine hissed in the background. He set the tray on the nearest table. A basket of bread, a small dish of olive oil mixed with herbs, sliced cheese, 2 cloth napkins. "Sit down," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I sat. My exhaustion was too deep to argue with a man who clearly wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. He returned with 2 small cups of espresso, the rich aroma cutting through my fatigue. He placed one in front of me, then settled into the chair across the table, his dark eyes fixed on my face. "The prayer you spoke over my father. That specific dialect isn't common. Even in Sicily, only certain villages still use those exact phrases." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for the heat. My grandmother was very traditional. She came to America when she was 19, but never really left the old country behind. She taught me prayers for everything, For meals, for sleep, for the dead. Where exactly was she from? A village called Corleone. Something flickered across his expression. He picked up his espresso, drained it in one practiced motion, then set the cup down with a soft click. My grandmother was from a village 20 miles from there. I spent summers in Sicily as a child, before— He paused, jaw tightening. Before my father brought me into the family business. The weight behind those words was unmistakable. I tore off a piece of bread, dipping it in the olive oil to give my hands something to do. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said quietly. "Your father was a good man. At least, he was kind to me. He liked you. He told me you treated him with dignity, that you never looked at him with pity or fear." "Why would I fear him?" "He was a dying man who wanted company." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, studying me with unnerving intensity. "You really don't know who we are, do you? I know you're wealthy. I know you have significant security. I assumed you were involved in something that required discretion. That's an exceptionally diplomatic way of saying you suspected we were criminals." My cheeks heated. "It wasn't my business to know. The agency was clear about that when they hired me, and you needed the money badly enough not to ask questions. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact, but it stung regardless." "Yes," I admitted. "I needed the money. My grandmother died 2 years ago. After 3 years of slow decline, I handled mostly alone. The hospital bills from her final months destroyed me financially. I couldn't get regular nursing work because potential employers would see the debt and assume I was unstable. The agency offered 3 times the standard rate, cash advances, and discretion. I took it because I was desperate." Nicholas reached for the bread, tearing off a piece with deliberate slowness. "Your honesty is refreshing. Most people in your position would try to pretend nobility, claim they took the job out of compassion for an elderly patient. I did have compassion for your father, but I also needed to eat and pay rent. Both things can be true." A ghost of something that might have been respect crossed his face. He ate the bread, then poured olive oil onto his own plate. "My father was the head of a large organization," he said, his tone conversational despite the gravity of his words. "An organization involved in activities that exist outside legal boundaries. Import, export, protection, territorial agreements with other groups who operate similarly." My stomach tightened. I set down my bread. "You're telling me he was a criminal, yes. A very successful one for 40 years. And now that role falls to me." The espresso turned bitter in my mouth. "I'd suspected, of course. You don't work in healthcare for years without recognizing certain patterns. The guards, the visitors who spoke in code, the way Giovanni would sometimes make phone calls in Italian that carried unmistakable authority, despite his weakened state. But suspecting and knowing were different things. Why are you telling me this?" Nicholas set down his napkin with precise movements. "Because you can't simply go home and pretend the last 6 months didn't happen. People in my world noticed how close you were to my father, how much time you spent in that house, how he trusted you enough to die in your presence. I was his nurse. Of course I was there. You spoke a prayer in a dialect that connects you to the same region where several powerful families originated. You have access to a house where sensitive conversations took place. You're exactly the kind of person rival organizations look for when they want information." Cold fear trickled down my spine. "I don't know anything. I never listened to his phone calls. I never looked at documents. I did my job and nothing else. I believe you." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "But the Russians who've been pushing into our territory won't care about the truth. They'll see an opportunity. A woman with access, with potential knowledge, who can be pressured or bought or threatened. Then I'll disappear. I'll move to another city, change my name if I have to. That won't be fast enough. They already know who you are." My hands started trembling. I pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "What are you suggesting?" "Protection. Temporary. Until after the funeral. Until the power transition stabilizes, and you're no longer an interesting target. My men will watch your apartment, escort you if you need to go anywhere. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm not getting more involved in this. I'll take my chances. It's not a chance you'll win. It's still my choice to make." Nicholas's expression hardened. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly, then set it face up on the table between us. On the screen was a photo of my apartment building, the entrance clearly visible, along with a timestamp from 15 minutes ago. My men are already positioned, he said quietly. Not to trap you, but because I gave the order before I left the house tonight. Before you even understood what you were walking into. Anger flared hot in my chest, burning through the exhaustion and fear. You had no right. I had every right. You stepped into my world the moment you accepted that job. You sat with my father through his final moments. You prayed over him in words my own mother used to say. That creates an obligation. An obligation for you, maybe, not for me. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I did my job with professionalism and compassion. Your father's death doesn't make me your responsibility or your prisoner. I never said prisoner. Then what would you call posting guards at my home without my permission? Deciding what risks I'm allowed to take with my own life? Nicholas rose as well, his height forcing me to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. I'd call it keeping you alive long enough to understand the danger you're in. Maybe I'd rather take my chances than owe anything to a criminal organization. The words hung between us, harsh and unretractable. I expected anger, threats, some demonstration of the power he clearly wielded. Instead, Nicholas simply watched me with an expression I couldn't read. My father told me you were stubborn, he said finally. He found it amusing. Said you reminded him of my grandmother, who once threw a pot at a man twice her size for disrespecting her kitchen. Despite everything, the image made my lips twitch toward a smile. That sounded exactly like something Giovanni would appreciate. Nicholas noticed. His expression softened fractionally. I'm not trying to control you, Miss Grant. I'm trying to prevent you from becoming collateral damage in situations you don't understand. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm standing it feels remarkably similar. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he looked tired. Actually tired. Not just physically, but emotionally worn down by grief. He couldn't afford to show and responsibilities he hadn't asked for, but would carry anyway. I watched my father die tonight, he said quietly. I'm now in charge of 300 people who depend on me for their livelihoods, their safety, their futures. I have rivals circling like sharks who smell blood in the water. I have internal challenges to my authority that will emerge before his body is cold. And I have a young woman who treated my father with more genuine kindness than most of his own family, who I will not let become a casualty because she's too proud to accept help. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the controlled, dangerous man who'd commanded the room at his father's bedside. This was someone carrying impossible weight, making hard decisions, trying to protect what remained of his world while it threatened to collapse around him. I sank back into my chair, sudden exhaustion making my legs weak. I don't want to be part of this, I whispered. I know, but you already are. The apartment on the Upper East Side was nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a tree-lined street. The furniture was modern but comfortable, all clean lines and neutral tones. A fully stocked kitchen, a bedroom with sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a bathroom with heated floors. It felt like a very expensive cage. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of reality. I had my phone, my laptop, access to television and books. But when I tried the front door on the first morning, a polite man in a dark suit materialized from somewhere down the hallway. Miss Grant, please let us know if you need anything. We're here to help. Help. That was the word they all used. The 2 men stationed in the building lobby, the one who appeared whenever I approached the door, even the woman who delivered meals twice daily, setting covered plates on the kitchen counter with a professional smile. Nicholas arrived each afternoon around 4. He never called ahead, never knocked. He used a key I hadn't known existed, entering like he owned the place, which I supposed he did. The first visit lasted 10 minutes. He asked if I needed anything, informed me that his father's funeral would be in 2 days, and left before I could formulate a response beyond basic courtesy. The second visit was longer. He brought a laptop, showing me security footage from outside my apartment building. 3 different angles of a dark sedan parked across the street, windows tinted, plates that came back as stolen when his people ran them. "Russians," he said, his tone flat. "Watching to see if you return." My stomach twisted. "How do you know they're Russian?" "Because I know the car, the crew, and the man giving orders. His name is Dmitry Volkov. He works for an organization that's been trying to expand into territory my father controlled for 30 years. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, at the dark car that looked like 1,000 other dark cars in New York. What do they want from me? Information about my father's operations, names of associates, locations of properties, details about financial arrangements. They think you might have overheard things during your time in the house. I didn't. I swear I know. He closed the laptop. But they don't care about the truth. They care about possibilities. The third visit changed something between us. Nicholas arrived later than usual after 7, his tie loosened and shadows under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept since his father died, which was probably accurate. "You should eat something," I said, gesturing toward the leftovers from my dinner that I'd barely touched. He glanced at the containers on the counter, then at me, surprise flickering across his features. "You're worried about whether I've eaten? You look exhausted." And grief doesn't excuse skipping meals. Something in his expression softened. He sat down at the kitchen counter, and I heated the food without asking permission, setting a plate in front of him along with silverware and a glass of water. He ate in silence for several minutes before speaking. "My father started grooming me for this life when I was 15, pulled me out of regular school, brought in private tutors who taught business strategy alongside calculus. By 17, I was attending meetings. By 19, I was running operations. I never had a choice about what I'd become." The bitterness in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. "Did you want a choice?" I asked quietly. "I don't know. I was too young to understand what I was giving up." He set down his fork. "What about you? Your file says you attended nursing school but never finished your degree." "Why?" "My grandmother got sick. Dementia first, then a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. She'd raised me after my parents died. I couldn't put her in a facility where she'd be terrified and alone. So I withdrew from school, became a certified nursing assistant, and took care of her myself. For how long? 3 years. Until she died owing $70,000 to hospitals and specialists and home care equipment companies. She'd been gone 2 years now. But the debt and the exhaustion still sat in my chest like a weight. Nicholas was quiet for a moment. "That's why you took the job with my father. Not just for money, but for that specific debt." "Yes." The collections calls never stopped. My credit was destroyed. Regular nursing positions wouldn't hire me because they thought I was a financial risk. Your agency offered cash, discretion, and enough money to actually make a difference. I would have taken almost any job at that point. "Almost any?" I met his gaze. "I still had lines I wouldn't cross. Your father needed medical care, not anything illegal or harmful. That made it acceptable." "Acceptable." He repeated the word like he was testing its weight. "Most people in your situation would use stronger justifications. Call it noble sacrifice or family duty. It was duty. It was also the only option I had that didn't involve watching my grandmother suffer in a state facility while I finished school. Both things are true." His expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "You don't lie to yourself." "I can't afford to. Lies are expensive." We talked for another hour after that, the conversation drifting from heavy subjects to neutral territory. He asked about my grandmother's village in Sicily. I asked about his childhood summers in Italy. The distance between us felt less absolute, less defined by categories like captor and captive, criminal and civilian. When he left that night, he paused at the door. "The funeral is tomorrow at 10. I'd like you to attend." "Why?" "I'm not family. My father would have wanted you there. And politically, your presence sends a message." "What message?" "That our family honors those who serve us with loyalty. That we protect our own." His dark eyes held mine. "Will you come?" I should have said no. Should have drawn a line between professional obligation and personal involvement. But Giovanni had been kind to me, had treated me with dignity, had made me laugh with stories about his youth, even when pain made it hard to breathe. "Yes, I'll be there." The church was in the Bronx. an old Catholic building with worn stone steps and stained glass windows that filtered morning light into colored patterns across wooden pews. People filled every seat, spilled into the side aisles, stood packed in the vestibule. I recognized some faces from visits to the Connecticut house. Others were strangers in expensive suits and designer dresses. I sat in the third row, wearing a simple black dress that had appeared in the apartment closet that morning along with modest heels and a dark coat. Everything fit perfectly, which meant Nicholas had somehow obtained my sizes. The thought should have disturbed me more than it did. The service was traditional, conducted half in English and half in Italian, by a priest who clearly knew the family well. He spoke about Giovanni's devotion to his late wife, his love for his son, his generosity to the community, carefully worded praise that acknowledged the man without mentioning the methods he'd used to acquire his wealth and influence. Nicholas sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his face a mask of control. Roberto sat beside him, along with several other men I recognized from that first night. The family resemblance was clear in some of them. The dark hair and strong features passed down through generations, but there was a coldness to them that unsettled me. Mechanical hugs, dry eyes, conversations conducted in whispers that seemed more about business than grief. Even Nicholas's mother, a thin woman with silver hair and expensive jewelry, looked more irritated than sorrowful. Only Nicholas seemed genuinely affected, though he hid it behind layers of careful composure. When the service ended, people filed past the open casket for final goodbyes. I waited until most of the crowd had moved through, then approached with several others. Giovanni looked peaceful in death, wearing a dark suit, his weathered hands folded across his chest. I made the sign of the cross, a gesture my grandmother had insisted upon even though we rarely attended church. Then, without planning to, I whispered the same prayer I'd spoken in his room 3 nights ago. The old Sicilian words felt right, felt necessary. Several elderly women near the casket turned to look at me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to approval. One of them, tiny and dressed entirely in black, nodded at me with what looked like respect. The burial was private, family only, which meant I returned to the apartment while Nicholas dealt with whatever ceremonies followed. But at 3 p.m, a car arrived to take me to the reception at the Connecticut mansion. The house looked different in daylight, less isolated and more imposing. Cars lined the long driveway. Catering staff moved through rooms carrying trays. People clustered in groups, their conversations low but animated. I stayed near the edges, accepting a glass of wine I didn't drink and trying to remain invisible. But Nicholas found me within 15 minutes, materializing at my elbow with the same unsettling awareness he always displayed. "You came. You asked me to." "I'm glad." He glanced around the room, his jaw tight. "This is the part I hate, the performance. Everyone pretending to care while calculating how his death benefits them. Not everyone is pretending. Some of those people at the church looked genuinely sad. The ones who knew him as a person, yes. But most of this crowd," he gestured vaguely at the well-dressed gathering, "they're here for appearances, to show respect to the new leadership, to assess whether I'm strong enough to hold what my father built." Before I could respond, a man lurched toward us, drink sloshing in his glass. He was younger than Nicholas, maybe late 20s, with the same dark hair but softer features. Family resemblance marked him as a cousin or nephew. "Nicky," his voice carried across the room, too loud, slurred at the edges. "There you are with your little nurse. Tell me, did she take good care of Uncle Giovanni? Did she make his last days comfortable?" Nicholas's expression went cold. "Go drink some water, Paolo. I'm just asking questions." Paolo's eyes swept over me with obvious assessment. "She's pretty, real pretty. Makes me wonder if the old man hired her for more than just medical skills." The insult landed like a slap. My face flushed hot with humiliation and anger. Nicholas moved so fast I barely registered it. One moment he was beside me. The next he had Paolo by the collar, slamming him against the nearest wall. A crystal glass fell from Paolo's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. "You will apologize to Miss Grant immediately." Nicholas's voice was deadly quiet, carrying more menace than any shout. And then you will leave my house and not return until you understand how to show basic respect. Paolo's bravado evaporated. I didn't mean... I was just... now. I'm sorry, miss. I spoke out of turn. Too much to drink. Nicholas released him with a sharp shove. Paolo stumbled toward the door, nearly colliding with Roberto, who had appeared with 2 other men. They escorted him out without another word. The room had gone silent. Every eye was on Nicholas, watching, judging, measuring his response to disrespect at his father's funeral. He'd just made a public statement about my position in his world, whether I wanted that statement made or not. Nicholas turned back to me, his expression controlled again, though tension radiated from every line of his body. I apologize for my cousin's behavior. You didn't need to do that. Yes, I did. His tone left no room for argument. In this world, disrespect spreads like disease if you don't cut it out immediately. The reception continued, but I felt every glance, every whispered conversation that included looks in my direction. I'd been marked, tagged as someone under Nicholas Santoro's protection, someone he'd physically defend in front of his entire organization. The implications terrified me. I slipped away as soon as politely possible, retreating to a bathroom on the 2nd floor. My hands shook as I gripped the marble sink, staring at my reflection in the gilt-edged mirror. Who was this woman wearing borrowed black, standing in a mansion full of criminals, protected by a man who broke glasses and threatened family members on her behalf? I didn't recognize her. When I emerged 10 minutes later, steadier but not calm, Roberto was waiting in the hallway. Miss Grant, the car is ready to take you back to the city whenever you're prepared to leave. Thank you. I'd like to go now, please. He escorted me through less crowded passages, avoiding the main gathering. As we reached the side entrance, he spoke quietly. Nicholas means well. His methods are harsh, but his intentions toward you are protective, not possessive. There's a difference, though it might not feel like it right now. How long have you worked for this family? 23 years. I watched Nicholas grow from an angry teenager into the man he is today. He's never lost control like he did with Paolo over anything personal, only business. That should tell you something. I hesitated, then asked, And Paolo? Roberto's expression didn't change. He's alive. He was sent away before he could make the mistake of repeating himself. He won't be back in New York for a long time. Something in my chest loosened. Not relief exactly, but the end of an unanswered question. It did, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what it was saying. The apartment felt too quiet after the chaos of the reception. I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea I didn't drink, and tried to read a book that couldn't hold my attention. At midnight, still restless, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this. Couldn't exist in suspension, waiting for Nicholas to decide when I was safe, when I could return to my life. The Russians might be watching my building, but New York was a big city. I could disappear if I was smart about it. Find a new apartment under a different name, pick up cash work that didn't require official documentation, start over somewhere Nicholas Santoro's protection couldn't reach. Nicholas wasn't wrong about the Russians. They would look for me. Maybe they already were. But being locked behind armed eyes felt like another kind of death, a slow one, with my name traded for my safety. If danger was coming, I wanted air in my lungs and choices in my hands, even if those choices were messy, even if they were wrong. I packed a small bag with essentials, dressed in dark clothes, and approached the front door at 1 a.m. As expected, the hallway guard was there, sitting in a chair near the elevator. Miss Grant? Is everything all right? I need some air. Just going to walk around the block. I'll accompany you. That's not necessary. It is, actually. Boss's orders. I tried the stairwell instead. Made it down 3 flights before another guard materialized from below, politely but firmly suggesting I return to the apartment. 3rd attempt. I tried to simply walk out the front lobby entrance. 2 men in the street straightened immediately, falling into step behind me. Furious and desperate, I kept walking, heading toward the nearest subway entrance. If I could get underground, lose them in the tunnels and trains, maybe I had a chance. I never made it to the station. A familiar black SUV pulled up beside me, window rolling down to reveal Nicholas in the back seat, his expression thunderous. Get in the car, Olivia. No. Get in the car, or I'll have my men carry you. Your choice, but either way, we're having this conversation. The guards had closed in, not threatening but present. People on the street were starting to notice. I climbed into the SUV, slamming the door with more force than necessary. Nicholas told the driver to circle the block, then turned to face me, anger barely contained beneath his controlled exterior. What the hell did you think you were doing? Leaving. The word exploded out of me. 3 days of controlled frustration finally breaking free. I was trying to leave this gilded prison you've trapped me in without asking my permission. Trapped you? Nicholas leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. I put guards on your building to keep you alive. I gave you a safe place to stay until the immediate threat passes. How exactly is that trapping you? You made every decision without consulting me. You didn't ask if I wanted protection. You didn't ask if I wanted to attend the funeral. You didn't ask if I was comfortable living in a stranger's apartment with armed men controlling my every movement. You just decided, and I'm supposed to be grateful. The SUV turned a corner, city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Nicholas's jaw worked. The muscle ticking in that way I'd learned meant he was controlling his temper. You're right, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him. I should have explained the situation more clearly before making arrangements. Explained what situation? That some Russians might be interested in me? That's not enough reason to control my entire life. It's not just interest, Olivia. He pulled out his phone, swiping through screens before turning it toward me. This is surveillance footage from yesterday. The same Russian crew that was watching your building followed one of my father's former business associates to a restaurant in Queens. They grabbed him off the street, took him somewhere for 3 hours, then dumped him back in front of his house with 2 broken hands and a message carved into his back. The image on screen showed a middle-aged man being helped into an ambulance, his shirt torn and bloody. What did the message say? My voice came out smaller than intended. Talk or bleed. They're systematically going after anyone who had regular contact with my father in his final months. Accountants, lawyers, drivers, household staff, looking for information about offshore accounts, property holdings, political connections, anything they can use to undermine my position or steal what my father built. Ice spread through my chest. I don't know anything about those things. I know that. You know that. But Dmitry Volkov doesn't care about truth. He cares about pressure points. You spent 6 months alone with my father. In his mind, that's 6 months of potential conversations, overheard phone calls, documents you might have seen while cleaning his room. You're a valuable target whether you actually know anything or not. The SUV circled the block again. I pressed my palms against my thighs to stop them from shaking. So what am I supposed to do? Hide in that apartment forever? Wait until you decide I'm safe to return to my life? No. That's not sustainable for either of us. Nicholas pocketed his phone, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. I have a proposal. A way to legitimize your position and provide real protection. I'm listening. Work for me, officially, as a medical consultant for the organization. I stared at him. You want me to work for the Mafia. I want you to provide medical services that we currently handle through less reliable channels. Emergency treatment for injuries that can't go to hospitals. Health assessments of potential business partners. Verification that pharmaceutical shipments are authentic. Nothing that would directly violate your professional ethics. Nothing direct, I repeated. Just adjacent to illegal activities. Yes, he didn't flinch from the accusation. But it would give you legitimate reason to be connected to the family. You'd be on payroll, with documentation, with a clear professional role. Not a target, not a loose end, but an employee under formal protection. And the payment? $60,000 over 6 months. Enough to clear your grandmother's medical debts and have money left over to restart your life however you choose. The number hit me like a physical blow. $60,000. Freedom from the collections calls, the damaged credit, the weight that had crushed me for 2 years. But at what cost? What kind of injuries are we talking about? I asked carefully. Gunshot wounds? Stab wounds? Sometimes. Also broken bones from accidents. Complications from chronic conditions in men who can't risk being documented at hospitals. Medication management for people with legitimate prescriptions they can't fill under their own names. You're asking me to become an underground doctor for criminals. I'm asking you to provide health care to people who need it in circumstances that protect both them and you. The alternative is, you go back to your apartment, hope the Russians lose interest, and pray that Dmitri doesn't decide you're worth the risk of grabbing off the street. The car turned onto a quieter street, parking along a darkened block. Nicholas gave the driver a subtle signal, and the man stepped out, giving us privacy. I need time to think, I said. You have 24 hours. After that, I need to know if you're with us, or if I need to make other arrangements for your safety. Other arrangements meaning what? Relocation, new identity, witness protection-style disappearance to somewhere the Russians won't find you. It's more extreme, more permanent, but it's an option if you can't accept working for the family. And my stomach twisted. Disappear completely? Leave behind everything, even the small life I'd managed to build? Or accept Nicholas's offer and step fully into a world I'd been desperately trying to avoid? Can I go back to the apartment now? Yes. But Olivia? He waited until I met his eyes. Don't try to run again. If you need to leave, tell me. I'll make sure you get out safely. But vanishing in the middle of the night when people are actively hunting you is suicide, not escape. I nodded once, throat too tight for words, and reached for the door handle. Nicholas's hand caught my wrist gently, stopping me. For what it's worth, I don't want to control you. I want to protect you. There's a difference. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, both options end with you making decisions about my life. One keeps you alive. The other respects your autonomy. I'm trying to find a balance between them, but I won't apologize for prioritizing survival. He released my wrist, and I stepped out into the cool night air. The driver reappeared, opening the lobby door with professional courtesy. I rode the elevator up in silence, let myself into the too-nice apartment, and collapsed onto the couch. 24 hours to decide whether to work for a criminal organization or disappear into witness protection obscurity. Neither option resembled the quiet, normal life I'd been trying to rebuild after my grandmother's death. I pulled out the laptop they'd provided, opening a browser with shaking fingers. If I was going to make this decision, I needed information. Real information. Not just what Nicholas chose to tell me. The search for Giovanni Santoro returned dozens of results. News articles about charitable donations to Catholic schools in the Bronx. Society page mentions of fundraisers he'd attended. An obituary listing his business ventures in vague, respectable terms. But deeper searches revealed other things. A federal investigation from 15 years ago that went nowhere due to lack of evidence. Whispers of connections to shipping companies with questionable practices. A pattern of businesses that thrived under his ownership and withered when competitors tried to move into the same territory. I searched for Nicholas next. Fewer results, more carefully controlled. Business school graduation. Board positions at several import-export companies. A single photo from a charity gala showing him in a tuxedo, unsmiling, standing beside an older couple identified as major donors. Then I found something unexpected. A small article from 3 years ago about a clinic opening in a poor neighborhood in the Bronx. Free healthcare for uninsured residents, funded by an anonymous donor. But the comment section included thanks directed at Mr. I. Santoro, and the family that never forgets where they came from. I clicked through to the clinic's basic website. Services offered: primary care, dental work, prescription assistance, mental health counseling. All free or sliding scale based on income. Photos showed a clean, well-equipped facility staffed by actual medical professionals. Another search revealed similar patterns. Scholarship funds for kids from the neighborhood where Giovanni grew up. A community center that offered job training and ESL classes. A fund for widows and families of men who died in workplace accidents. A euphemism that probably covered criminal activities gone wrong. The contradiction confused me. How could the same man who ran illegal operations also fund legitimate help for struggling communities? How could Nicholas, who casually discussed breaking hands and threatening rivals, also maintain his father's charitable work? I spent 3 hours searching, reading, trying to understand the world I was being asked to join. The sun was rising when I finally closed the laptop. No closer to a decision, but at least better informed. At noon, Nicholas arrived unannounced, letting himself in with that key I still hadn't seen. He carried coffee in a bag from a bakery I recognized as expensive. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, setting everything on the kitchen counter. "I was researching your family. And what did you find? Contradictions, violence and charity, control and community support. I don't understand how both things can be true." Nicholas poured coffee into 2 mugs, sliding one toward me. "They're true because the world isn't simple. My father hurt people who threatened what he built. He also remembered what it was like to be poor, to watch his mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Both things shaped how he operated. And you? Do you see the world the same way? I see the world as it is, not as I wish it could be. I inherited an organization built on violence and loyalty and mutual benefit. I can't transform it into something respectable overnight, even if I wanted to. But I can choose how I wield that power, who I protect, what lines I won't cross." I sipped the coffee, buying time to organize my thoughts. "If I agree to work for you, I need conditions." "I'm listening." "I want autonomy to refuse specific assignments that cross ethical lines I'm not willing to blur. I won't torture information out of people. I won't help dispose of bodies. I won't participate in anything that makes me complicit in killing." "Agreed." The quick acceptance surprised me. "Just like that? I need a medical professional, not an enforcer. Those boundaries work for both of us. I want it in writing, a contract that specifies my role and my right to refuse work. Roberto can draw something up this afternoon." I set down my coffee mug, studying Nicholas's face for signs of deception or manipulation, but his expression remained open, almost respectful. "Why does this matter so much to you?" I asked. "You could find another doctor willing to work under these conditions. Someone already comfortable in this world. Why push so hard to keep me involved?" Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. "Because you prayed over my father in a language that connected him to his childhood. Because you cried genuine tears when he died. Because in a room full of people performing grief, you were the only one who actually felt it." He paused. "And because you're right that I make too many decisions without consultation. Having someone who challenges that, who demands autonomy, might keep me from becoming the kind of leader I don't want to be." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't manipulation or strategy. This was something raw, more human. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. "For 6 months. Then we renegotiate or I walk away clean." "Agreed." He extended his hand across the counter. I shook it, his grip firm and warm, sealing an agreement that would change everything. "Roberto will be here at 3 with paperwork," Nicholas said. "Once you sign, you're officially under family protection. That means you can move freely again, return to your apartment if you want, though I'd recommend staying here until after the contract is finalized." "Why?" "Because officially employed is different from officially protected. The paperwork makes it real in ways that matter to the Russians. They won't touch anyone actively working for the family without risking full-scale war." The apartment door opened without warning, admitting Roberto himself, apparently summoned by some signal I hadn't noticed. He nodded politely. "Miss Grant, I understand congratulations are in order for your new position. News travels fast. In this family, information is currency. Nicholas, we have the situation in Queens contained. The accountant is cooperating fully now that he understands our position." They spoke in careful euphemisms, but I understood the implication. Someone else had been pressured, threatened, possibly hurt, and I was now part of the organization that did such things. What had I just agreed to? 2 months into my new role, I'd stopped flinching when men arrived bleeding. The medical office Nicholas had set up occupied the 2nd floor of a property in Queens, above what appeared to be a legitimate shipping warehouse. Clean white walls, proper examination table, locked cabinets stocked with supplies I didn't ask how he'd obtained. Everything I needed to do the job, nothing extra to draw attention. My first patient had been a soldier named Anthony with a knife wound across his ribs. Shallow but infected. He'd sat on the table making jokes while I cleaned and sutured, acting like getting stabbed was as mundane as a paper cut. The second was a man in his 50s with poorly managed diabetes who couldn't risk having his name in hospital systems. I'd spent 3 hours teaching him proper insulin administration and adjusting his medication schedule. The work was strange, ethically complicated, but not as dark as I'd feared. Most of what I treated were consequences of dangerous work, rather than active violence. Broken fingers from warehouse accidents, chronic pain in aging men whose bodies had endured decades of physical labor, infections that needed antibiotics but not emergency rooms. Nicholas appeared more often than strictly necessary. He'd arrive during appointments, claiming he needed to review security protocols or check inventory in the warehouse below. But he'd linger, watching me work with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional oversight. Last week, I'd sutured a deep laceration on a young soldier's forearm, while Nicholas held a flashlight steady, compensating for the exam light that had burned out that morning. Our hands had brushed twice as I worked, small accidental contacts that sent electricity up my arm. 3 nights ago, an emergency had kept me working until dawn. When I'd finally finished, exhausted and wired on adrenaline, I'd found Nicholas in the small break room brewing espresso at 3 a.m. We'd sat together drinking coffee while he told me about a deal gone wrong in Boston, and I'd told him about the time my grandmother had accidentally set her kitchen on fire trying to deep-fry Zeppelis. The boundaries between professional and personal had been blurring for weeks. I'd stopped trying to reinforce them. Today's appointment was different. Roberto had called ahead, his tone careful, explaining that Nicholas needed me to evaluate a business associate before finalizing a major agreement. The man's name was Vincent Mancini, 72 years old, and the deal involved territorial rights worth several $1 million. "Mr. Santoro wants your medical assessment," Roberto had said. "Nothing invasive, just your professional opinion on whether Mr. Mancini is healthy enough to honor long-term commitments." Vincent Mancini arrived at 2 p.m, accompanied by his wife and 2 bodyguards. He was tall despite his age, with thick white hair and the kind of posture that suggested military background. His wife, Marie, was 20 years younger, blonde and expensively maintained, with jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. "Miss Grant," Vincent greeted me warmly, shaking my hand with firm pressure. "Nicholas speaks highly of your discretion. I appreciate you making time for this examination." "Of course, Mr. Mancini. If you'll come with me, we can get started." The examination should have been routine. Blood pressure, heart rate, basic neurological checks, review of current medications. But something felt wrong within the first 10 minutes. Vincent's hands trembled slightly when extended. Not the tremor of age, but something more concerning. His skin had a grayish undertone beneath his tan. When I checked his eyes, faint discoloration around the whites suggested liver stress. "Mr. Mancini, have you been experiencing any digestive issues lately? Nausea, stomach pain, changes in appetite?" "Some stomach trouble," he admitted. "My doctor said it's probably stress. The business has been demanding." "Any hair loss? Unusual fatigue?" "Now that you mention it, yes. But I'm 72. These things happen." I continued the examination, my concern growing with each finding. Muscle weakness in his legs. Slight confusion when I asked him to repeat a sequence of numbers. A faint metallic smell on his breath that most people wouldn't notice, but my training flagged immediately. "I'd like to run some blood work," I said carefully, "just to rule out a few possibilities." Marie spoke up from her chair near the door. "Is that really necessary? Vincent sees his regular doctor every 3 months." "I'm sure he does. But Mr. Santoro asked for my assessment, and I'd rather be thorough." Vincent waved his hand dismissively. "Do whatever tests you need, Miss Grant. I want this deal with Nicholas to go smoothly, and if a clean bill of health helps, I'm happy to cooperate." I drew blood, labeling the vials with careful precision, then completed the rest of the examination. When I finished, I found Nicholas waiting in the hallway outside, leaning against the wall with his phone in hand. "Well?" he asked. "I need to run tests. I'll have preliminary results by tonight." His eyes sharpened. "That's not a routine answer. It's the honest one. Give me 6 hours." The blood work confirmed my suspicion. Arsenic levels 3 times above normal range, consistent with chronic low-dose poisoning over several months. The pattern suggested regular exposure, not a single large dose. Someone was slowly killing Vincent Mancini. I sat in my small office staring at the results, my stomach churning. If I told Nicholas, he'd investigate. If the poisoner was discovered, they'd likely disappear in the same way Paolo had after threatening me at the funeral. Permanently. Violently. But if I said nothing, Vincent would die a slow, agonizing death, while everyone blamed natural causes. The ethical choice was clear. The emotional weight of that choice was crushing. At 8 that evening, Nicholas returned. I handed him the printed results without preamble. He's being poisoned. Arsenic. Administered regularly in doses small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to cause progressive organ damage. Another few months at this rate, and he'll die of what appears to be natural causes. Nicholas read the results twice, his expression darkening with each line. You're certain? The blood work doesn't lie. Someone with regular access to his food or drink is poisoning him. Who knows about these results? Just you and me. The lab I used is one of yours. They don't ask questions and don't keep records. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'm sending Roberto to collect Vincent's medications, vitamins, anything he takes regularly. We'll test everything. Nicholas. I waited until he looked at me. What happens to whoever's doing this when you find them? They stop being a problem. That's not an answer. His jaw tightened. They attempted to murder a man under my protection during negotiations that affect my family's interests. What do you think happens? I'd known the answer before asking, but hearing the confirmation still made my chest feel hollow. I need you to understand something, I said quietly. I told you this because Vincent doesn't deserve to die from poison, but I didn't tell you so you could add another body to whatever count you're keeping. I told you so you could save his life. I intend to. He pocketed his phone. But consequences for attempted murder are non-negotiable. 4 days later, Roberto informed me that the source had been identified. Marie Mancini had been adding small amounts of arsenic to her husband's morning coffee for 6 months, hoping to inherit his substantial estate and business interests before he could finalize the deal with Nicholas. What happened to her? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. She's no longer a concern, Roberto said diplomatically. Vincent Mancini recovered quickly once the poisoning stopped. Nicholas moved forward with the territorial agreement, and Vincent apparently never learned how close he'd come to death or who'd been responsible. He thanked Nicholas profusely for recommending such a thorough medical evaluation, crediting it with catching his mysterious illness early. 2 weeks after that, I was reviewing supply orders in my office when my phone rang. The hospital billing department, calling about my grandmother's outstanding account. Miss Grant, I'm calling to confirm that your balance has been paid in full. We wanted to make sure our records are correct before closing the account. My hand tightened on the phone. Paid in full? There must be a mistake. I've been making monthly payments, but the balance was still over $40,000. Our records show a payment of $42,316 was received 6 days ago. The account is now at zero balance and marked as closed. I ended the call, staring at my phone like it might offer explanations. $42,000. The exact amount I'd owed, down to the last dollar. Nicholas had paid my debt. After I'd specifically told him during our first real conversation that this was my burden to carry, my responsibility to handle, he'd eliminated it without asking permission. I found him in the warehouse below, reviewing shipping manifests with 3 of his men. He looked up when I entered, reading my expression immediately. Gentlemen, give us the room. They filed out without question. The warehouse felt cavernous in the sudden silence. High ceilings and concrete floors amplifying every small sound. You paid my grandmother's medical bills, I said. Yes, without asking me. Without telling me. Yes. He set down the clipboard he'd been holding. You proved yourself valuable to the organization. You made a difficult ethical choice that saved an ally's life. I rewarded that loyalty by taking away the one thing I was working to accomplish on my own, by removing an obstacle so you could focus on building a future instead of paying for the past. The logic was sound. The gesture was generous. So why did I feel simultaneously grateful and angry? I don't understand you, I admitted, exhaustion seeping into my voice. You operate in a world of violence and control. But then you do things like this. You fund clinics for poor neighborhoods while running criminal operations. You threaten to break people who cross you, Then you protect a woman you barely know. Which version is real? Nicholas moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. All of it is real. I'm not one thing, Olivia. I'm the son who watched his father build an empire on loyalty and fear. I'm the leader who inherited that empire and all its contradictions. I'm the man who spent his entire adult life making impossible choices about who deserves protection and who deserves punishment. That's a politician's answer. I want the truth. His dark eyes held mine, something vulnerable flickering beneath the usual control. The truth is that I'm tired of being alone at the top. Every decision I make affects hundreds of people. Every weakness I show becomes leverage for rivals. Every personal connection becomes a target. I've learned to trust no one completely, to keep everyone at a distance. And me? You're different. You challenge my decisions. You set boundaries. You cry at funerals and pray over dying men and refuse to be intimidated even when you probably should be. He paused, his voice dropping lower. You make me remember that I'm human, not just a position to be filled. The confession stripped away pretense, leaving something raw and honest between us. I'd spent 2 months trying to maintain professional distance, reminding myself that Nicholas Santoro was dangerous, that his world wasn't mine, that attraction meant complication I couldn't afford. But standing in the empty warehouse with afternoon light filtering through high windows, I couldn't deny what I'd been feeling. The way my pulse jumped when he entered a room, the warmth that spread through my chest when he remembered details I'd mentioned weeks ago. The safety I felt despite logic screaming that a Mafia boss shouldn't make anyone feel safe. You paid my debts to remove my primary motivation for staying, I said slowly, working through the implications. Either you're confident I'll stay anyway, or you're giving me the freedom to leave without financial pressure. Both. I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you're trapped by circumstances. That's a risk. What if I take the money and walk away? Then I'll know I read you wrong, and I'll let you go. The honesty in his answer decided something for me. I closed the distance between us, looking up into his face, seeing past the controlled exterior to the loneliness he'd just admitted, the weight of leadership he carried alone. I'm not leaving, I said. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Relief flashed across his features, quickly masked, but unmistakable. His hand lifted, hovering near my face before he seemed to think better of it and lowered it again. You should know that staying close to me gets more dangerous, not less. Enemies see you as leverage. Allies see you as a weakness to exploit. The protection I offer comes with targets on your back. I know. I'm choosing it anyway. Why? Because you see me as more than a debt to be cleared or a problem to be solved. Because you trusted me to make hard choices and respected the boundaries I set. Because somewhere in the past 2 months, you stopped being the dangerous man who commandeered my life and became someone I actually want to know. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I answered with equal honesty. Because you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I matter for something beyond what I can provide. Not as a nurse for hire, not as a granddaughter fulfilling duty, but as someone whose choices and opinions actually carry weight. Nicholas studied my face, and for the first time since I'd met him, he smiled. Not the controlled expression he wore during business negotiations, but something genuine and unguarded that transformed his entire face. We're both terrible at this, he said. At what? Letting people in. Trusting. Building something that isn't transactional. Well, then I guess we'll figure it out together. His hand found mine, fingers threading through in a gesture that felt more intimate than it should. The warehouse around us, the criminal empire, the ethical compromises, all of it faded into background noise. For the first time since my grandmother died, I felt like I was building towards something instead of just surviving. The call came at 11 at night while I was inventory checking in the Queen's office. Nicholas on the line, his voice clipped and urgent. How fast can you get to the warehouse? We have a man down. Femoral bleed. Can't risk a hospital. My stomach dropped. Femoral artery meant minutes, not hours. I'm already here. Bring him up. 3 minutes. I heard tires screaming outside before the timer on my phone hit 2 minutes. Car doors slamming, shouted instructions, then the thunder of boots on the stairs. They carried him between them. a man in his 30s with dark hair matted with sweat, his legs soaked red from mid-thigh down. "Table now!" I snapped, already pulling on gloves, grabbing supplies. "Someone tell me what happened." "Ambush in Brooklyn," Roberto said, helping lift the injured man onto my examination table. "Russians grabbed him off the street 6 hours ago. We got him back, but he took a bullet during extraction. 6 hours. Too long for this kind of wound." The man's skin was gray, his breathing shallow. I cut away his pants, exposing the injury. Entry wound high on the inner thigh, the placement making my chest tighten with dread. If the bullet had nicked the femoral artery, he'd have bled out already. But if it was just close, pressing against it. "His name's Anthony," Nicholas said from somewhere behind me. "He's 28. He has a wife and a daughter." I didn't have time to process why Nicholas was giving me that information. My hands moved on autopilot, assessing, calculating. The bullet was still inside. I could feel the hard mass when I palpated carefully. Removing it here, without proper imaging or surgical equipment, was insane. Leaving it was a death sentence. "I need better light. Someone hold a flashlight steady. Don't move no matter what you see." Nicholas stepped forward immediately, taking the industrial flashlight Roberto handed him. Our eyes met briefly. His dark with worry, mine focused and clinical. "This is going to be rough," I warned Anthony, though he was barely conscious. "I don't have proper anesthesia, just local numbing and something for the pain that won't knock you completely out." "Do it," Anthony managed, his voice weak. I administered what I had, waited 30 seconds I couldn't afford, then made my incision. Blood welled immediately. I'd been right. The bullet was lodged against the artery, a millimeter from catastrophe. One wrong move and he'd bleed out on my table. My hand stayed steady even as my heart raced. I'd done emergency surgery during my clinical rotations, but never like this. Never with mob soldiers watching. Never with a man's life literally in my fingertips. "Olivia." Nicholas's voice cut through my concentration. "Tell me what you need." Silence. "And keep that light exactly where it is." He didn't speak again. None of them did. The only sounds were Anthony's labored breathing, the clink of instruments, and my own controlled exhales as I worked. 40 minutes. That's how long it took to extract the bullet, repair the damaged tissue, and close the wound with sutures that would hold until proper surgical follow-up. When I finally stepped back, my scrubs were soaked with blood, and my hands were trembling with delayed adrenaline. Anthony's color was better. His breathing had evened out. He'd survive. "Get him somewhere he can rest," I instructed. "He needs IV antibiotics every 6 hours, which means he stays where I can monitor him. No moving him for at least 3 days. We'll set up a room in the warehouse," Roberto said, already pulling out his phone. "Whatever you need, Miss Grant." The soldiers who'd been watching from the doorway looked at me differently now. Not as the boss's medical consultant or his potential romantic interest, but as someone who'd just saved their friend's life under impossible conditions. Respect, earned through competence rather than proximity to power. Nicholas waited until everyone had cleared out, until it was just us in the surgical aftermath, before speaking. That was extraordinary. That was desperate improvisation. I peeled off my gloves, my hands finally starting to shake now that the crisis had passed. "He should be in a real hospital with real surgeons. But he's not. He's alive because of you." I turned to find Nicholas watching me with an intensity that had nothing to do with the medical emergency. Something had shifted in how he looked at me, though I couldn't name exactly what. "I need to clean up," I said, suddenly aware of how I must look, covered in Anthony's blood, exhausted and wired. "Olivia," I stopped. "Thank you for what you did tonight. For every choice that brought you to this moment where you could save one of my men." The gratitude in his voice was raw, unguarded. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and headed for the small bathroom to wash away the evidence of how deeply I'd embedded myself in this world. 3 days later, the photograph arrived. Roberto brought it to me while I was checking Anthony's wound, which was healing remarkably well. Just a manila envelope with my name written in block letters, left at the warehouse entrance sometime during the night. Inside was a single photo. Me, walking into the Queen's building, my medical bag over my shoulder, the the timestamp showing it had been taken 72 hours ago. On the back, written in the same block letters, "We know where she works." My blood turned cold. Nicholas was in the warehouse within 20 minutes of Roberto's call. He looked at the photo once, his jaw tightening into a hard line, then made 3 phone calls in rapid Italian. When he finished, his attention turned to me. "Pack whatever you need from here. You're not coming back to this location." "Where am I going?" "Connecticut. The mansion where my father lived. It's defensible in ways this place isn't." Fear crawled up my spine, but I pushed it down. How did they find this office? They've been watching us for weeks, mapping our operations. We knew they had some surveillance, but not this close. His voice carried controlled fury. "This is Dimitri's way of sending a message. He can reach you whenever he wants. But he hasn't. He just sent a photo. This time. Next time might be a bullet or a kidnapping. I'm not waiting to find out which." For once, I didn't argue. The photograph made the danger real in a way that verbal threats hadn't. Someone had been close enough to take my picture. Close enough to hurt me. And I hadn't even known they were there. The Connecticut mansion felt different when I returned. Not the elegant house where I'd cared for Giovanni, but a fortress. New security measures were everywhere. Cameras covering every approach. Guards stationed in rotating shifts. Reinforced doors. Panic buttons installed in every room. Nicholas moved me into a guest suite on the 2nd floor, 3 doors down from what I now understood was his own bedroom. The proximity felt deliberate, protective rather than presumptuous. "You'll stay here until we neutralize the Russian threat," he explained, showing me where supplies were kept, how the security system worked. "My men will be present at all times. If anything feels wrong, you hit the panic button and they respond in seconds." "How long will this take?" "Weeks. Maybe a month. Dimitri won't back down easily, but he'll make a mistake eventually. They always do." Days blurred into a strange domestic rhythm. Nicholas was present more than I'd expected, working from the mansion's office instead of his usual locations. We'd cross paths in the kitchen at odd hours, both unable to sleep. He'd make coffee while I'd sit at the counter pretending to read. We'd talk about nothing important until the sky started lightening, then retreat to our separate spaces. Meals became shared events. Not formal dinners, but casual encounters where we'd both happen to be hungry at the same time. He cooked sometimes. Simple Italian dishes his grandmother had taught him. I'd watch him move around the kitchen with surprising competence, and he'd watch me watching him, both of us aware of the tension building between us, but neither quite ready to address it. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Nicholas came back from a meeting with blood on his collar and a shallow cut along his jawline. Nothing serious, just the kind of scrape that happened in his world. But seeing it made my stomach clench. "Let me clean that," I said, before thinking better of it. He followed me to my room where I kept a proper medical kit. I had him sit on the edge of the bed while I gathered supplies, hyper-aware of the intimacy of having him in my personal space, of standing between his knees as I dabbed antiseptic on the cut. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "Disagreement during negotiations. The other party thought physical intimidation would strengthen his position. He was incorrect." My hand trembled slightly as I applied butterfly closures to hold the edges together. Nicholas noticed, his hand coming up to steady my wrist gently. "I'm fine, Olivia. I know, it's just..." I couldn't finish the sentence. Just that seeing him hurt made me realize how much I cared, how deeply I'd let him into spaces I'd sworn to keep locked after my grandmother died. His thumb traced small circles on the inside of my wrist, and I forgot how to breathe properly. "This thing between us," he said, his voice low. "It's not just me feeling it, is it?" I should have lied. Should have maintained professional distance. Should have remembered all the reasons why falling for a Mafia boss was catastrophically stupid. "No," I whispered. "It's not just you." The storm hit that night, thunder rolling across Connecticut like artillery fire. Power flickered twice before dying completely, plunging the mansion into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in for essential systems, but most of the house remained black. I was making my way downstairs by phone flashlight when I nearly collided with Nicholas in the hallway. "You okay?" he asked, steadying me with hands on my shoulders. "Fine. Just wanted to check the generators. They're working. The outage is external. Should be fixed by morning." He didn't remove his hands. "Come with me. I have candles in the office." His office was warmer than the rest of the house, a fire already burning in the fireplace that I hadn't known existed. Candles provided pools of golden light, making the space feel intimate rather than merely dark. We settled into chairs near the fire, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The storm raged outside, rain hammering windows, wind howling around corners. Inside felt safe, separate from the chaos. "I've been thinking about that first night," Nicholas said eventually. "When I saw you pray over my father, I knew then that you were different. That you'd complicate everything." "Complicate how?" "By making me care about something other than maintaining power. By giving me a reason to want different things than what I've spent my life building." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you want?" He turned to face me fully, firelight casting shadows across his strong features. "Honestly, I want you. I've wanted you since you challenged me in that restaurant, since you set boundaries and demanded respect, since you saved Anthony's life with hands that wouldn't stop shaking afterward. I want you in ways that terrify me because wanting anything that much is weakness in my world." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. "But you deserve honesty," he continued. "Being with me means accepting that I'll always have enemies, that threats will exist, that violence follows me like a shadow. You've seen glimpses of that life, but living in it permanently is different. Harder. More isolating." "I know." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I've been watching you for months now. I've seen the decisions you make, the weight you carry, the people who depend on you. I'm not naive about what your world requires. Then you also know that if we cross this line, everything changes. You stop being my employee, or my responsibility. You become something more valuable and therefore more vulnerable. I understand." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face serious in the flickering light. "I need you to be certain, Olivia, because I can't be casual about you. It's all or nothing for me. If we do this, you're mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have." The possessiveness in his words should have worried me. Instead, it sent heat through my body, settling low in my stomach. "I feel more alive in these last months than I have in years," I admitted. "Despite the danger, despite the ethical compromises, despite knowing I should walk away, you make me feel like I matter for who I am, not just what I can provide. That's worth the risk." Nicholas stood, crossing the small distance between us. He offered his hand, and when I took it, he pulled me up gently, bringing us close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. "Tell me you need more time, and I'll give it to you." Instead of answering, I closed the final inches between us, lifting onto my toes to press my mouth against his. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, but quickly escalated into something urgent and consuming. His hands framed my face, then slid into my hair. I gripped his shirt, feeling his heart pounding beneath my palms. Months of tension and restraint finally broke free, leaving us breathless and desperate. When we finally pulled apart, Nicholas rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. I meant what I said. You're mine now. That's not a phrase I use lightly. I know that too." He kissed me again, slower this time, more thorough. When his hands started to drift lower, when I felt myself leaning into his touch, he stopped abruptly, stepping back with visible effort. "Not like this," he said, voice strained. "Not in a blackout where you might wonder afterward if it was just adrenaline or fear or gratitude. It's not, I know. But I need you to be completely certain. Tomorrow, in daylight, when the storm has passed and you've had time to think clearly, if you still want this, we'll talk about what it means." The restraint in his voice, the care behind his words, made my chest ache. He was giving me an out, making sure this was real choice rather than passionate impulse. Okay, I agreed. Tomorrow. He walked me back to my room, his hand never leaving the small of my back. At my door, he kissed me one more time, soft and lingering, then forced himself to step away. Sleep well, Olivia. You too. I watched him disappear down the dark hallway before closing my door and leaning against it, my heart still racing, my lips still tingling from his kiss. Tomorrow would bring complications and conversations we couldn't avoid. But tonight, in the darkness with storms still raging outside, I let myself feel hope for the first time in years. Hope that maybe, despite everything, I'd found something worth fighting for. The call came from Roberto at 6 a.m, his voice tense in a way I'd never heard before. Russians hit one of Giovanni's clinics in the Lower East Side. They have 12 hostages, 3 staff members, and 9 patients. They're demanding Nicholas show up personally to negotiate. I was already pulling on clothes, my mind racing. That's a trap, obviously, but they're threatening to start executing hostages in 2 hours if he doesn't comply. What clinic? I asked, my stomach twisting. Roberto gave me the address. My breath caught. I knew that neighborhood intimately. Years ago, when I'd still lived in Boston but visited New York regularly, I'd done volunteer shifts at hospitals in that exact area. I'd walked those streets, knew the layout, understood the community. I'm coming to the house, I said. I have an idea. Nicholas was in his office when I arrived, surrounded by maps and security feeds, his expression carved from stone. The man I'd kissed last night, who'd been vulnerable and honest, had disappeared behind the armor of leadership. Olivia, this isn't— Listen to me first, I interrupted. They want you because you're the target. They're not expecting a woman, especially not a medical professional claiming humanitarian concern for the hostages. His eyes sharpened. What are you suggesting? Let me go in as a negotiator. I'm a nurse worried about injured people. It's believable, non-threatening. I can assess the situation from inside, create an opening for your team. Absolutely not. His voice was flat, final. I'm not sending you into a hostage situation with armed Russians who already threatened you once. You're not sending me. I'm volunteering. There's a difference. Roberto spoke up from near the door. She has a point, boss. Dimitri's crew won't see a woman as a threat. They'll underestimate her, which gives us advantage. No. Nicholas stood, his full height and authority filling the room. Find another option. But I was already moving toward the door, toward the gear room where I'd seen tactical equipment stored. There isn't time for another option. Those people have 90 minutes before Russians start killing them to prove a point. I found what I needed. A bulletproof vest, thin enough to hide under clothing. Nicholas appeared behind me as I was strapping it on over my shirt. Olivia, please. His voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something rawer. Don't do this. I can't. He stopped, jaw working. I just found you. I can't lose you to Dimitri's games. I turned to face him, placing my hands on his chest. You won't lose me, but I can't stand by knowing I might help save innocent people. That clinic exists because your father wanted to give back to the community. Let me honor that. His hands covered mine, gripping tightly. If anything happens to you, it won't. I'll be careful. And you'll have shooters positioned, right? You'll get me out if things go wrong. Roberto cleared his throat. We can have eyes on every entrance within 30 minutes. The building is old, lots of access points for entry teams. Nicholas stared at me for a long moment, conflict visible in every line of his face. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Fine. But you wear the vest, you carry a panic button, and the second anything feels wrong, you signal us, and we come in hard. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. 20 minutes later, I was dressed in clean scrubs with a white medical coat over the bulletproof vest. My hair pulled back professionally. I carried a medical bag Roberto had packed with actual supplies plus tracking devices and a microphone so Nicholas's team could hear everything happening inside. The drive to the Lower East Side took 40 minutes through morning traffic. I spent it controlling my breathing, reviewing what I knew about negotiating with desperate people, praying I wasn't about to get everyone killed through arrogance. Nicholas rode in the vehicle behind mine, close enough to respond instantly, but far enough not to be spotted by Russian lookouts. His voice came through the small earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "We're positioning teams now. You have shooters on 3 surrounding buildings and entry teams ready at 4 access points. You're not alone in there. I know." My voice was steadier than I felt. The clinic was a modest 2-story building wedged between a bodega and a laundromat. Bulletproof glass on the windows, security bars that wouldn't stop professionals, but deterred casual break-ins. A man with a rifle stood visible behind the front glass, watching the street with obvious tension. I approached slowly, hands visible, medical bag held away from my body. The man's weapon tracked my movement. "I'm a nurse," I called out. "I heard there are injured people inside. I'm here to help, nothing else." The door opened a crack. A different man appeared, younger, nervous energy radiating off him. "Who sent you?" "No one sent me. I volunteer at clinics in this neighborhood. I'm just here to provide medical care." He spoke rapid Russian into a radio, then gestured me inside with his weapon. Slowly. Any wrong move and I shoot. The clinic's waiting room had been trashed. Chairs overturned, magazines scattered, the receptionist's desk shoved against a wall. 12 people sat on the floor against the far wall, hands zip-tied, faces pale with fear. I recognized 2 of the staff members from photos I'd seen in Giovanni's personal files. 3 Russians total. The nervous young one by the door, an older man with a scar across his cheek guarding the hostages, and a third man sitting in the corner clutching his chest, his face gray and sweating. "I'm here to check if anyone needs immediate medical attention," I said calmly, moving toward the hostages. Scarface blocked my path. "No one called for a nurse. People with medical training don't wait for calls when lives are at risk. Let me do my job, then I'll leave." In my ear, Nicholas's voice. "Careful. The one in the corner looks like Dimitri's lieutenant, Victor. If he's commanding this operation and he's compromised." I ignored him, focusing on the hostages. A woman in her 60s with a blood-stained sleeve. A young man cradling his wrist at an awkward angle. A pregnant woman whose breathing was too fast, eyes wide with panic. "I need to treat these people," I said firmly. "That woman's bleeding. The pregnant one is having a panic attack. Let me help them and you'll have healthier hostages to negotiate with." Scarface looked uncertain. The nervous young one spoke up. "Victor, she's just a nurse. What harm can she do?" "Victor." The lieutenant. The man clutching his chest like his heart was trying to escape his ribcage. "Your friend doesn't look well," I observed, shifting my attention to Victor. "Chest pain? Shortness of breath? That's cardiac distress. Stress-induced, probably. But it can still kill you if untreated." Victor's eyes narrowed. "I'm fine. You're not. Your color is terrible. You're sweating despite the cool temperature, and you're protecting your left side. Classic heart attack symptoms." I moved slowly toward him. "Let me check your vitals. If you collapse from a coronary event, your whole operation falls apart. Self-interest won over suspicion." Victor nodded sharply. I knelt beside him, pulling out a blood pressure cuff and stethoscope, working with deliberate calm while my heart raced. His blood pressure was dangerously high. His pulse was erratic. Not a full heart attack yet, but close. Very close. "You need medication," I said quietly, for his ears only. "I have nitroglycerin in my bag that will help stabilize you. But cardiac episodes require rest and low stress, neither of which you're getting while running a hostage situation. I can't let them go, not until Santoro comes." "Santoro isn't coming. He's not stupid enough to walk into an obvious trap. But he might negotiate if you release the hostages as a show of good faith, especially if I tell him you're having a medical emergency and need safe passage to a hospital." Victor's face twisted with frustration and pain. "If I release them without getting what we came for, I'm dead anyway. Dimitri doesn't forgive failure." In my ear, "Entry teams ready on my signal. Say the word." I ignored Nicholas, focusing on Victor. "What if I can get you something valuable enough to take back to Dimitri? Something that proves this operation wasn't a complete failure." "Like what?" "Information about Santoro's operations. Names of suppliers, locations of warehouses, details about upcoming deals." I lowered my voice further. "I work for him. I have access to things you'd never get through interrogation." It was a complete bluff. I knew almost nothing about Nicholas's business operations beyond what I'd observed directly. But Victor didn't know that. His eyes searched my face, calculating, desperate. Why would you betray him? Because I'm a nurse first. I took an oath to preserve life. Right now, I have 12 innocent people at risk, and you having a cardiac event. If giving you some minor intelligence gets everyone out safely, that's the choice I make. Victor's breathing was getting worse. His hand trembled as he clutched his chest. The hostages go free. You stay. You give me the information. Deal. But you take the nitro first. Can't share intelligence with a corpse. I administered the medication, watching his color improve fractionally. Then I stood, addressing Scarface. Cut their zip ties. They're being released. Victor. Scarface started. Do it, Victor ground out. We have something better than hostages. We have inside information. The hostages were freed, stumbling toward the exit in shocked disbelief. The pregnant woman was crying. The elderly woman clutched her bleeding arm. They filed out into the street where I knew Nicholas's people would collect them. Now it was just me and 3 armed Russians. Victor struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the desk. Start talking. First, I need to treat that arm wound properly, and the young man's wrist needs splinting. There are no hostages left. No, but there's you, having a cardiac episode. Consider it humanitarian care while I organize my thoughts about Santoro's operations. I was stalling, buying time for Nicholas's teams to reposition now that hostages were clear. In my ear, Roberto's voice. 30 seconds. I moved toward my medical bag slowly, making sure Victor could see everything I was doing. My hand reached for bandages. Then everything happened simultaneously. Windows shattered as flashbang grenades came through. The door burst inward. The nervous young Russian raised his weapon, and I dropped flat, covering my head. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Then silence. Strong hands pulled me up. Nicholas, in tactical gear, his face a mask of controlled fury and relief. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Victor needs a hospital. Real cardiac distress. Roberto and his team had the 3 Russians in custody, disarmed and restrained. The scarred one was wounded, the young one unconscious from the flashbang. Victor was barely conscious, clutching his chest. Get EMTs for all of them, Nicholas ordered. 2 of Nicholas's medics moved in immediately, one to the older woman's bleeding arm, one to the pregnant woman, guiding her breathing until the panic eased. Only then did the tension in my shoulders release a fraction. And somebody get Olivia out of here before press arrives. The aftermath took days to fully unfold. Victor survived his heart attack, but faced federal charges along with his crew. More importantly, the raid broke Dmitri's operational leadership. His lieutenant captured, his hostage play foiled, his reputation damaged by a nurse outmaneuvering him. Other Russian factions saw weakness and moved against him. Within 2 weeks, Dmitry Volkov was dead, killed by rivals from his own organization. His territory was divided among various groups through negotiations Nicholas helped facilitate. The immediate threat to both the Santoro family and to me personally was neutralized. Nicholas announced changes at a family meeting I wasn't present for, but heard about from Roberto. Less reliance on violence as a first response. More investment in legitimate business ventures. Expansion of the charitable work Giovanni had started, now with Nicholas's name attached publicly. You influenced that, Roberto told me over coffee at the Connecticut mansion. He's been different since you came into his life. More willing to consider paths that don't involve breaking people. I didn't ask him to change. No. But you made him want to. That's more powerful. I'd taken over managing the clinic in the Lower East Side once it was repaired and reopened. Not as secret mob charity, but as a public venture with the Santoro name on it. We hired proper staff, expanded services, partnered with legitimate medical organizations. I split my time between that and the discreet medical practice for family members who still needed treatment outside official channels. It was a compromise between the world I'd trained for and the world I'd chosen. Not perfect, but honest. 3 months after the hostage situation, Nicholas called a private dinner at the Connecticut mansion. Just family, he'd said. Immediate circle only. I dressed carefully in a burgundy dress I'd bought myself. not borrowed or provided. My own choice, my own money, my own statement about who I'd become. The dining room held 20 people. Roberto, several soldiers I'd treated, Nicholas's aunt from the funeral, a few cousins who'd proven loyal. The atmosphere was relaxed, wine flowing, conversations overlapping in English and Italian. Nicholas stood when I entered, moving to pull out the chair beside his at the head of the table, a position of significance that everyone noticed. "Thank you all for coming," Nicholas said once we were all seated. "My father built this family on loyalty and mutual protection. He believed in taking care of our own. Olivia Grant embodies those values. She's proven herself through service, through courage, through commitment to the people in this organization." He turned to face me, his dark eyes warm. "She's also proven herself to me personally, which is why I'm making this announcement officially, so there's no confusion about her position. Olivia is under my protection. But more than that, she's chosen to stand beside me. And I've chosen her." The table erupted in applause and raised glasses. Heat flooded my face, but I didn't look away from Nicholas. Roberto stood, raising his wine glass. I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not. I knew that first night, when the boss insisted she leave with him instead of me, that something had shifted. You don't fight for someone like that unless they matter. To Nicholas and Olivia, may you both find what you're looking for. Everyone drank. The dinner continued with warmth and genuine celebration. People approached to offer congratulations, to share stories, to welcome me officially into the family structure. Late in the evening, when others had dispersed to various rooms, Nicholas found me on the terrace overlooking the grounds. Stars were visible despite the light pollution, cold November air sharp against my skin. "No regrets?" he asked, settling beside me. "About which part? Working for a criminal organization? Falling for its leader? Risking my life in a hostage situation? Any of it." I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been drowning in debt, working a job that isolated me, convinced I'd never build anything meaningful. Now I managed a clinic that actually helped people, had cleared my grandmother's debts, and stood beside a man who'd proven himself worth the complications he brought. "No regrets," I said. "This isn't the life I imagined, but it's the one I chose, and I'm choosing it again every day." Nicholas pulled me closer, his arm around my waist. "Good. Because I'm not letting you go, even if I wanted to leave, even then, though I'd make a much more compelling argument for staying." I laughed, leaning into his warmth. Behind us, through the windows, I could see Roberto and the others, my strange new family continuing their celebration. In front of us stretched the Connecticut landscape, dark and peaceful. Somewhere in the city, the clinic I managed bore Giovanni's name and continued his legacy. Somewhere in Queens, my medical office treated people who needed help without judgment. Somewhere in this complicated world, I'd found a place that felt like home, not despite the danger and moral complexity, but somehow because of it, because Nicholas had seen me as more than a debt to clear or a problem to solve, because I'd proven myself through choices that mattered, because we'd both decided that building something together was worth the risks. "I love you," Nicholas said quietly. Not a question, just a statement of fact. "I know," I replied, equally quiet. "I love you too." We stood there in the cold November night, the Mafia boss and the nurse who'd stumbled into his world through compassion and stayed through choice. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be more threats, more ethical compromises, more nights spent worrying about consequences.